Hello, everyone. Blessings and good chi. This is our 5 element correspondence podcast series. This is the fire element. This is the second podcast. If you haven't viewed the first one, I do recommend you go and watch that one first because it has a lot of beginner information to understand and get the most of this series. We're diving into the the fire element associated with the heart, getting ahead of myself there. The paired yang organ is the small intestine. So let's learn about the fire element. So the heart is often called the emperor or the ruler of the internal organs. This is because the heart has great importance in the central functioning to the whole body. It is the leader of the zhang or the yin organs. The heart's primary function is to govern the blood and the blood vessels and to house the mind, aka the shen. We'll get more into the shen in a little bit here. But let's just talk about a few functions of the heart as a broad overview. It governs the blood and the vessels. It houses the mind and shen. It manifests on the complexion. It opens to the tongue, meaning it's connected with the tongue. It controls the sweating. And it's related to, I mentioned the negative emotion, anger associated with wood, and each of the corresponding 5 elements and their associated yin organs are associated with a negative emotion. But the heart's a little funny. It's certainly associated with a negative emotion, and part of that is the spectrum of excitation. And on that pathway or spectrum of excitation, there's anxiety, all the way to like the extreme of going into shock. But on the other polarity is joy. And in Chinese medicine, this is like when you're too excited and the negative effects of that on your system. As I mentioned, it's a spectrum of excitation, meaning stimulation, activation of the system, and prolonged activation and excitation is draining. Yeah? So we'll get in a little bit more about that one, but just the introduction there to the range of emotions that's connected to the heart is, yes, the excitation spectrum, but it's also known to be like the chief regulator or the emperor of the, like, all the emotions. So anytime there's any kind of emotional dysregulation going on, we know there's going to be some connection to the heart. Let's get more specific into some of the things that I mentioned. The heart governs the blood by taking the energy we get from food, we call the food chi for simplicity, and transforms that energy into blood and is responsible for the circulation of that blood within the vessels. So the blood vessels depend on the chi of the heart to move the blood through the vessels, which are the residents of the blood. So if we're looking at the body for signs of imbalance, we may look to the complexion of a person. In the literature, it talks about a connection between the tongue and the heart. And I've seen this at multiple levels, but in general, the tongue has a complete diagram of all the organs on it. So the specific part of the tongue associated with the heart is the very tip of it. So if this area is like really red or inflamed in an individual, typically it means there's a heart imbalance, like excessive heat in the body. And just for your own knowledge sake, this is the tip of the tongue, and then if you go a little bit back, that's where the lungs are. More towards the middle is the spleen and the stomach. As you get to the very base or back of the tongue is the kidneys, the bladder, and the intestines. And then on the sides of the tongue, liver and gallbladder. There's all these kind of maps you can look online to see tongue charting and see if you can look up some patterns in your tongue. But I find it quite complex to learn these just online. It's best to go to a skilled professional who's trained in that specific way of diagnoses. In Chinese medicine, the sweat is known to be very much connected with the blood. So they say to adequately maintain blood volume, the heart allows transportation of fluids through the vessels to become blood. The excess of blood is given up as sweat. Hence, sweat becomes the fluid of the heart. An interesting story from my life. I had excessive sweating. I was one of those kids where you know how you have like the little bits of armpit sweat, but that would like balloon out to pretty well fill up my whole t-shirt. Primarily underarm sweating, but full body sweating, I could break out in like a sweat which would just like drench my whole body. And I had this for a number of years in high school. I don't know when it started, but I had it close to when I was still graduating, and then I had it in university, and I had to discover a way to go about my day in a normal way. So sometimes what I would do is I'd buy like multiple t-shirts of the same t-shirt so that when I sweated through one, I could just exchange and nobody would notice. And then there was, yes, of course, wearing black and things that would cover the sweat. And then I discovered something called a Thompson tee. Who knows if they're around anymore. But they sold t-shirts, like under t-shirts that you put under your t-shirt with like big pads in the armpits that would soak up the sweat. So I could wear like a nice dress shirt and then I could put this on underneath and I could soak up the sweat. I mean, it would get really stinky if I didn't, of course, wash it regularly. But yeah, this was a saver for me in university as I would get really nervous. And then I don't know if there was a specific process or practice, but two things that I can name is a lot of this was anxiety induced. So excitations is heart related. And I know it definitely also coincided with going to hot yoga a fair amount. And at first when I would go to hot yoga, I would drench. One time I wrung out my towel in my water bottle and it was well over a liter, and I would have so much sweat from my pooling that it would like drip off into another pooling of somebody else. I would feel really bad. And then over time I started to sweat less and less, and over time the emotions of anxiety and these kinds of things got regulated in my life, so I wasn't going into such an extreme state of anxiety and nervousness and stress when I would be around and talk to people. And now I mean, I can wear any kind of t-shirt. I don't really sweat a lot, whether it's hot or cold. I'm very adept in the cold water and in the heat, and my body has learned to regulate its temperature. And I would say even in like a more conscious way, like I can heat my body up if I'm going in the cold. I can cool my body down, and part of this is just through different practices that I've done, and it's also having a much more clean and clear system. So that was an interesting note about something that must have been an imbalance of the heart that was affecting me in various ways, mentally, emotionally, physically, and being able to overcome that in my life. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about heart, chi, blood, yin and yang. And I know I mentioned I won't go too deep into traditional Chinese medicine because I don't think it's necessary for the average person listening to this. But it can be interesting to know a little bit about the yin and yang aspects of these different organ systems and some of their functioning, yeah? So when the heart chi and the blood are abundant, the heartbeat is regular, the pulse is moderate and forceful, and the complexion is healthy and lustrous. If you have deficient heart chi and blood, this will be seen as like a dull and lustrous complexion, perhaps like cold limbs and palpitations, very common in heart imbalances, insomnia, shortness of breath. And this is partly because the heart circulates chi and blood throughout the body so that the chi and the blood may carry out their functions of warming, moistening, activating, and so on. Now, if we get down into the heart, yin and yang, they refer to two different aspects of the heart. The yang aspect is a lively and strong heartbeat with smooth blood flow and expansiveness, whereas the yin aspect is a moderate heartbeat with a calm nature and a passive aspect of expansiveness. So these two are both regulating factors within the heart's chi to bring about more harmony. So it can either be too much heart yang, too much heart yin, deficiency in heart yang, deficiency of heart yin, etc. So the heart's yang qi helps to move the blood through the vessels. So if there's a deficiency in the heart yang qi, it's often the result of the kidney yang deficiency. So the kidneys are known as like the water element, whereas the heart is known as the fire element. So they talk about it in terms of like the kidney water will begin to overcome the heart's fire. It'll dampen it, yeah? So the wind, cold, damp will be like assaulting to the heart. Or from the dampness and stagnation of the blood obstructing the heart orifices. So it's important to know that the heart is associated like with a closer link to the lungs and the kidney. Especially with yang deficiencies, it'll be more commonly present with either of these two organs. There'll be something often going on with that little triad there. And so remember how I mentioned the 6 environmental, like the external pathogenic factors? We had the heat and the wind and the dampness, these kinds of things. So as we've been talking about this, we have the heat factor associated with the heart. If you're getting deficiency of the heat, such as I just mentioned with the kidney water being too much, it's more likely to manifest as like a tongue without coating on it, a fine pulse, like a malar flush in the cheekbones, whereas excess heat in the heart is like a full red complexion, a yellowing coating on the tongue, perhaps like a bitter taste in the mouth, a dark, scanty urination, and a full pulse. So now that we know a little bit about how the fire element connected to the heart manifests in the body, let's talk a little bit about some of the other associations. Remember our big beautiful list? We have colors and spirits and emotions and virtues and tissues and pathogens and so many beautiful ways that we can get a deeper understanding of how this elemental energy and the chi that's related to it flow and connect us to various different aspects of our body, emotions, and mind, as well as to the cycles of nature and the forces of nature to better understand ourselves, gain more direction and awareness in life about what is happening on a subtle level that allows for this orchestra of the human being to take place. And we have a connection between laughing and the heart. And there's different levels. Of course, we have this spectrum of excitation, right? There's like the full out ecstatic laugh, barreling, throwing head back. That's the good stuff. And I mean, I know they say too much joy is not good for the heart, but I don't know if you're going to have too much of that kind of laughing. Maybe we're going to have to test that one out. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like the nervous laughter, like the, ha, do you like my joke? That kind of laughter. So we can pick these things up in an individual and we can find out if there's any kind of imbalance going on at multiple levels. It's another really beautiful way of getting diagnosis in there. In terms of the taste is associated with bitter, and this is known to bring about more balance in the heart. So if you're having anxiety, go suck on a lemon. To be honest, I don't use the 5 different tastes as prescription to treat any of these things. I've never tried them, never worked with them. I know individuals who have done it and have reported success, so I would refer out to them, and you can do your own experimentation as to how you use these kind of things. I'm more of like, these are all systems, yeah? Like 5-element correspondence, 5-element theory, and I work with what's called the holistic energy medicine system, and then that's something that I've created, which is a harmonization of several different systems that I've connected with. Some individuals, they find a complete system like traditional Chinese medicine, yin and yang theory included, meridian theory, etc. And they can prescribe their whole way of being, how they move, how they eat, as per what the system denotes, yeah? Whereas I've learned from multiple different systems, and I find some systems I just vibe with better. So I take those aspects, like I follow the teachings of Paul Chek and other individuals who taught me more about nutrition and eating than I have learned from Ayurveda or 5-elemental theory, these kind of things. So I maintain my approach to eating and wellness with certain dimensions through other systems. I also utilize the 7 chakras and other aspects of different systems, like the 4 elements from the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island or Canada here. So this is like an invitation for you to explore whatever of these feel resonant for you. And like I'm specialized in breath work and energy work and Qigong. So a lot of my ways of working with this system is to pull from it those aspects that I work on. I'm not really giving a lot of people dietary advice because that's not in my respective domain. And as I mentioned, I already have a system that I work with. So when saying all these correspondences, these may have some connection to you for your own self-assessment. This may be something applicable to you. This may be something you want to look into further as a way of developing yourself and your skills. Yeah. It's associated with the season of summer in like midday. And you can think about the full spectrum of the seasons. Like winter is yin yang. It's the most introspective, turning in, slowing down, hibernating, slow, cold, things of this nature. Spring is like yang and yin, but moving towards the more yang aspect as things are uprising, growing, becoming more active in our lives as more sun comes out, daylight savings for many people, coming out into the world more daylight hours, yeah. And then summer is yang yang. This is like peak yang, most sunlight. Most people are doing festivals, retreats, vacations, events, all these kinds of things. Peak activity, like your doings. And then as we go into autumn, this is yang and yin, but more towards the yin nature as we're beginning to slow down. And then in the spectrum of the day, it's the same thing. The middle of the night is yin yin, and then yang rising, yang yin for the springtime, and then the middle day is our yang yang, peak work hours, yeah? And when we go to our 24-hour TCM clock, we have the heart organ from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So this is the ideal time for the blood circulation, having high energy and eating lunch, these kinds of things. From 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., we have the small intestine, the partnered yang organ. And this is a good time for the sorting and absorbing of food, and a little bit of a lower energy, but still good peak hours. So the spiritual component, just like the wood element is connected with the hun, the fire element is connected with the shen. And I mentioned this in the beginning, and I want to expand a little bit more. I've heard many different teachings on this, and some of them are a little bit contradictory. Not necessarily contradictory, but there's many different layers to how these things work. So it's associated with what they call the Shen, S-H-E-N. And this can mean multiple different things in different contexts, and that's why it gets confusing. So the Shen is the heart mind, and this is one of the ways in which the Chinese talk about the mind. They don't just say the mind as in thought process, and what we ordinarily associate with mind, I would say, in the West. But they know it as the heart mind, and it's very much connected with the emotions. And I feel like that's very valid and a really beautiful way of articulating the connection, because anytime your emotional state changes, it's going to have a corresponding shift in your thoughts, yeah? I mean, what are beliefs and thoughts, what ideas attached to feelings? So there's an inexplicable link here that connects those two. So I think that's a really valid point, to connect the heart-mind as one unit. But there's also good reason to see them as separate. For example, from a more Western lens, we could look at different systems of the body in terms of like biological oscillators. One of those being your brain, one of those being your heart brain. Your heart has its own nervous system. If you take it out of the body, it has an intelligence to beat itself. It processes information through the neurons in the heart that have different hormones associated with it. And it's got its own control panel, so to speak, that offers intelligence. It offers communication with other parts of the nervous system. It offers different rhythms. This is what they're known as an oscillator. Of course, we have the heart rhythm, but there's also other coordinations that the heart does. And then we have the enteric nervous system, or the gut-brain axis. And once again, we have a lot of neurons. We have a command and control center of information exchange. And these three biological oscillators can, in some sense, work on their own, and they can work in harmonization with one another. They primarily work on their own in the negative sense when there's imbalance. For example, if you have a lot of gut inflammation, you have something going on with the gut that prevents the proper communication of the information from the gut to the other centers in the body, you as an individual are going to be affected by this consciously and unconsciously. Whereas if there is optimal health in the gut and in the heart, like the emotional body, and in the brain, the thinking mind, then you'll have optimal decision making. You'll have greater access to the information being processed within you, which relates to that decision making. And there are different ways to actually connect these as a more conscious and deliberate process. So yes, just general mental, emotional, and digestive health is important. But there are specific Qigong practices which help to connect the energies of these three biological oscillators. Many of the Qigong practices, particularly medical Qigong, do various different things that connect the energy between these organs. And what we're learning about here, what I'm offering and introducing, is that there are many different relationships. We talked a little bit about the relationship of the heart and its close connection with the lungs and the kidneys. Those relationships have energetic bridges of qi moving between them. And at a certain level of practice, this isn't just about memorizing these things and learning it like rote memory. There's a capacity we have to feel the connection between the heart and the lungs. And the more that we understand this as a more visceral, even though it's beyond the viscera, at a more like palpable, energetic reality that is the base reality at the level of Qi Foundation. To understand that is to get to know what is happening on that very subtle level, so that when these imbalances occur, we can be like, oh, I feel the derooting of my breath from my kidneys. This means I'm in stress. Hey, what can I do as a simple process to reconnect those, and understanding what practices or processes you can go take part in, which are going to help to connect, which will bridge what has been broken, yeah? So I've completely derailed myself. So we're talking about the heart mind, yeah? And then if we talk about the Shen, which I mentioned has multiple different layers, we can also look at the Shen as spirit. And this is where it gets a little confusing, because people in the Chinese medicine way and context say many different things as spirit. And one of the ways that I've entered into this is that the edge of my mind, my mind is not physical. It's it has a physical coordination to the brain and different structures of the body, depending on what we call mind. But there's also the mind field. And the mind is a little bit like diffuse in this way, meaning that there's a mind field. It's like a scattered field of energy that I can focus like a spotlight, but I can also expand my mind to go beyond what is body sense. Like there's an aspect of my mind that helps me to process the five senses and what I'm consciously aware of in this moment. But there's, let's say, higher aspects of the mind. Some people call these the higher mind. We could classify the imagination here. You could talk about the soul here as an aspect of mind. Typically people would spell that like capital M-I-N-D, or the great mind of God, capital M-I-N-D. So we're looking at a spectrum from your individual mind in its five sense reality, and then what goes beyond the five senses, the higher mind, imagination, these kinds of things, as one larger spectrum. So when people are saying Shen and they're talking about mind, they may be talking about spirit, but they may also be talking about the heart mind as the more physical rooting of the mind that we're more familiar with. So it can get a little bit confusing here. My understanding is it is both of those things. An aspect of what they would call the spirit, like not just the mind, the spirit, like not the soul, because that's the Hun and the Po in this system, but an aspect of your spirit, the original spirit, like Yuan Shen, connected with the Tao, does house itself in the heart And this is also why it's very much connected with the emotions, as these are an expression of the spirit through the body, mind, and emotional matrix. This has relevance if you go into various different shamanic practices and you want to bring someone's spirit back if there's been some kind of loss of spirit or there's been some disturbance of the Shen, that you may want to treat these kinds of things. And I did mention that the wood element is associated with the eyes in the last podcast, but very much too we can see the essence of the spirit, as we say in our popular culture, that you can see the eyes are the window of the soul. So you can see something very deep about somebody's spirit or soul when you look into their eyes. In DCM, they would also say that the heart houses the Shen and therefore interprets the experiences and how we view the world. This is one of its faculties, as coming in with the interpretation of our emotions, because all the emotions will pass through the heart field, as well as interpreting our experiences. Just for information, we'll get to this in a later podcast, there's an aspect of the mind which they term the yi, which is associated with the earth element. And the yi is like your attention. And it's something that we cultivate in the practice of Qigong through concentration exercises and through the earth element Qigong, etc., which help to focus the mind's attention like a spotlight. And there's something that happens when you focus the yi, and we'll get more into this, of course, in that episode, but there's a sharpening of the mind's, like the sharpening of the mind's intellect, you could say, sharpening of the attention to view more details. And when you do this through an exercise, you can also take the mind's yi, its attention, and the energy you've cultivated behind the yi, to look inside the body at a deeper level. Because we are multi-leveled, we're multi-dimensional, and sometimes we are viewing what is most conscious. It's superficial on the surface, and then there's also our capacity to have access to deeper levels of subconscious and unconscious information, or what was sub or unconscious. This is partly through the process of sharpening the yi and focusing on that aspect of the mind. Now, each of the elements are explored as not just like ideas, but how they relate to essential functions of qi. The fire element is associated with the expansion of qi in the system, whereas the water element is more associated with like circling or rotating the qi around, like in the microcosmic orbit. So when we do fire element Qigong, and this isn't going to be a tutorial in that movement, we work on expanding and contracting the Qi, which is going to help the fire element. And one of the ways we do this is to round in like a spinal flexion, and then to sink the awareness into the heart and finding the center of the center of the center of the heart. There's this like continual movement towards the center. Just like the sharpening of the yi, there's degrees to which you can do it, particularly once you sharpen your consciousness and your attention that allow it to refine to greater levels. And then there's an opening and expansion from that central point in all directions, like a bomb going boom, blowing off. 360 degrees, expanding out from the center of the chest. And as that expands out, you go through the layers of body, and then out into the energy field, into the farthest reaches of the universe. And then that repeats. You draw the awareness, the energies in towards the center, ultimately going beyond the physical, and then the layers of subconscious, unconscious mind, and ideally all the way back into the soul, connecting to the center, to the Tao, and then expanding out. And then as you expand out, it's like you're moving through the various different layers of your being and body. And then as you are beginning to move out from the peripheral of like your physical heart, you may experience like a debris of emotional baggage. Some people call this armoring of the heart, or a heaviness in the chest. And as you expand and contract, or expand and go towards the center, You have an opportunity to clear and cleanse any energetic debris that's been hanging out around the heart. And this is one of the therapeutic ways that the heart, the heart Qigong, pardon me, allows for a clearing of these emotions. And this is, I don't know if I talked too much about this in the first episode. This is part of how, like, the mechanism of these elemental Qigong forms work. They're not just a fancy movement of the hands. In fact, most of the movements are quite simple and not very fancy at all. But they're more about what is the underlying energetics of the movement and how does it support that energetics. Because we could also look at if somebody is out of rhythm, there's something going on with the heart, or the fire element would be better to say, then that expanding and contracting field isn't active in the way that we would like it. So rather than it helping you to go in towards your soul and expanding out, you may be contracted, like stuck or blocked at some point in there because of perhaps that heaviness in the heart, a bunch of blocked emotions that aren't ready to be felt right now because you don't feel quite safe or ready, etc., etc. So the energy field of the heart wouldn't be so expanding and contracting, and you can perhaps even feel into a moment in your life when that has been a reality, when you've been experiencing something quite hard and you've contracted your energy within. You may even experience that of, like, you're walking in a group and you're energetically small. You're not making yourself big and known, versus a time when you've been heart opened, looking to make loving connections, emotionally available, and how there's a whole energy around you, an aura, a spirit, your spirit shining out from the center like a spotlight in all directions. So getting to know what the essential action is of the fire element, like what is it doing to the chi, becomes the deeper levels of these teachings. And once again, just like the observation of the subtleties of how the energies of, say, the kidneys connect to the heart, we can understand at a deeper level the nature of chi in these energies to live a more fulfilled life, a more connected and harmonious life energetically. And these things aren't small things. These things are connected to all things. This is the beauty of the holistic nature of this system, is that when we learn it more and more, we see how the expansion and contraction of the heart field connects to different emotions we're feeling or blockages that we're feeling in our life. And as individuals take on the Qigong practice and integrate more pieces of traditional Chinese medicine in their life, they have more tools to touch in on a regular basis to be their own doctor, to be their own priest, if you will, their own guide in the spiritual realm. Because there's a energetic awakening and unfolding that happens for individuals as they follow this path. It's just the nature of things, because understanding yourself as energy is the true nature. It's your birthright. It's foundational. It's what it is. You know, it's known in science, but it's not known, you know? Gnosis, like true direct experience of it, that's the knowing that I'm speaking to. It's a deeper level than knowing it intellectually and proving it on some paper in a Western science medical journal, which is important for the mind, and science has a great value to it. And understanding it as true experience, as a direct experience, is true experience, pardon me. So that's the idea, is to get to know the foundational reality that you are energy. And it comes with an awakening, because this is not the conditioning. This is not what we've been taught to believe. And it's not that you haven't known, because many of us as children knew this. I would say all children at some level know it, consciously or subconsciously, however we want to go into that. But there's a knowing experientially that you are the universe. Every baby is born realized in some certain sense, maybe not in the highest sense of what we speak to in spiritual traditions, but has a basic remembering, or they're very close to spirit and their spiritual nature, like their true nature, which understands themselves as energy. So we're reclaiming that knowledge. And some people call the pathway of Qigong and other pathways similar like Tai Chi the pathway of reversal. And because the understanding is that everything comes from Tao through the Wu Ji, through the two forces, yin and yang, etc., culminating up to where we're at now in the physical. And then we have a capacity to energetically like go backwards into that path. It's like, okay, now enter beyond your mind, beyond the energy. What is beyond that, and beyond that, and beyond that, and eventually you get to the soul, and when you eventually go beyond that, you go right to the Wu Ji, and eventually you go beyond that, and you go right to the Tao. Like, this is the path. This is what is available through the cultivation of the body and mind. It's a fascinating journey. So let's do a little bit of a review. So we talked about some of the signs that we may pick up at the level of the physical if the fire element is out of balance. The key things being that it's mostly related to heat. So if we know there's heat symptoms in the body, it may be connected to the fire element. We can see these through the sweat and the body fluids of the body. I mentioned the tongue having a big connection to it, as well as the face and the complexion of an individual. One of the major signs that you'll see if somebody is off is like palpitations. We won't see these, but it's a common thing to have heart palpitations or sweating, overexcitation, anxiety, shock, overexcitement, nervous laughter, these kinds of things. In terms of the virtue, pardon me, this isn't all review because I haven't mentioned the virtue. The virtue is love. I mean, that tracks. Makes sense. Love is the antidote to really all emotional imbalances at some level, right? And love is a great antidote. It's a great medicine for anxiety. It helps to calm the heart from the overexcitation. And I really like the understanding of there's these negative emotions and then there's virtues. And there are different ways to apply these in the Qigong practice. For example, we do these healing sounds, which are specific sounds vocalized from different areas in the body. So like the heart sound is the ha sound. And that could be like a sigh out. Or you could like ha, say the sound out. But what you're looking to do is vibrate the area of the body you're working with. So in this example, it would be the heart. And you're looking to do that as a purge. Like this is going to help you to release. And then when you breathe in, you're breathing in good energy. This is going to help you to tonify. And you want to be mindful of that you're tonifying the right amount, that you're purging the right amount. Because sometimes you need to release more things than you need to tonify, add more energy in. And sometimes you don't need to release that much. It's more about supporting the body. I'm not going to go into a deep conversation about the healing sounds here, but I mention that because in that process, sometimes we set that intention of if there's any anxieties on my heart, may I let them go. And this is a really beautiful intention when it's meant properly. If you just say that and it's just in your mind, it's not really going to be effective. But if you mean it, you're willing to let these things go, you're willing to see them, opening yourself up into shadow work and more awareness, and then you exhale and you release as much as you can. You may feel some stuckness and energy moving. And then when you breathe in, you invite in the virtue or quality of love. And I find that an act really helps to land that in the embodiment in the physical. So instead of just thinking, I breathe in love, maybe I can massage my body. I can do this in a loving way. I can monitor the way in which I'm touching myself and do it in a way that if I were to be touching my beloved, if I were to be touching the foot of God, the foot of my guru, that I would do it in such a way that it felt deserving or harmonious with what my heart's deepest desire for, that quality of touch, that caress. So when I do that, what I'm doing is I'm retraining my body with my mind. I'm setting those intentions of how I want to act, and I'm setting up a circuit that goes, when there's anxiety, I choose love. And the more this is done, this becomes a subconscious pattern that there's more of a compulsion, if you will, like a healthy compulsion, maybe a better word could be said, but a compulsion towards shifting immediately from anxiety into love. And this creates a really beautiful pattern. So when we work with, say, the earth element and there's worry and we have the virtue of faith, we're like, boom, worry, yes, I know what to do now, faith. Otherwise, we go into worry, consciously or subconsciously, and this derails us into control pattern loops. Worrying thoughts gets us in the head, we become disconnected from the body. We're not processing the emotion of worry, rather we're caught in loops of it, etc., etc. But if we have a process and practice that we're doing on a regular basis that says, hey, let's identify negative emotions in the body, let's feel them. These are not negative in the sense that they're evil or sin. It is safe to feel these. It is good to feel these. And then let's cultivate virtues that help me to feel these more fully and deeply, to process them in their wisdom. And as a byproduct, then I get to help support others who are in anxiety, knowing, hey, as individuals in anxiety, I'm just going to radiate love towards them, and naturally their system will help to calibrate, and maybe there's actions that I can do that as well can help support them in that process. Moving forward, so the heart is paired with the small intestine. Just a quick piece on that one. Many individuals who have anxiety have some kind of gut imbalance. And now the GI system has different aspects, and a lot of it is related to the earth element, but really all elements are connected in some way because of the vastness of the GI system. But a lot of anxieties can be stored in the small intestine, so this can be an area to work on. But there's a lot going on at multiple levels. We would look for heat signs and other things in the intestinal imbalance, and then how to treat it, which is a little bit more to traditional Chinese medicine, so we won't go too deeply into that as per this podcast. So that's our beautiful fire element associated with the heart. Stay tuned for the next 3 episodes. We're following the generative cycle around the 5-element correspondences chart, which means next time we'll be going to the earth associated with the spleen, stomach, and pancreas.